The next thing we want to talk about is handling resistance. And it's probably the most asked question that I get. How do I get my team to follow the process? And I said it a time or two before, and I'll say it again. You can't get them to follow a process if you don't yet have a process in place. You can't get angry at someone for not knowing that they should be doing something if you didn't tell them they needed to do it in the first place. If you didn't give them a system or outline the expectation or tell them why, then you can't hold them accountable to following systems and processes. So the first step is to capture what you're doing. That's what the MVS is. That's what the CCF is all about. That's what building the system for creating systems and that machine I told you or showed you a moment ago about is about making it easy for you so that you can capture the systems, so that you can then form a base, so that you get the foundations in place, which then makes it much easier to start to hold someone accountability or hold someone accountable. You must be clear on your expectations. And once it's clear who is doing what by when, and you build this like accountability and transparency culture, there's nowhere to hide. That's ultimately what you want. You want to have it so clear that any team member at any point in time, whether it's you or someone else, can jump into a task, see where it's up to. It's clearly, interchangeable. If that person can't do the task and it's got to be done, well, there's a system or a process that explains how it's done, and that can be reassigned if it needs to be. Like that's the level that we want to get to. Once you get to there, then it makes it infinitely easier to handle resistance, because there's a little bit of a framework on how you can do it, but you have to get your foundations down to be able to handle the resistance. I'm just going to make sure that that's sharing, Simon. Yep, perfect. So I'm going to choose a different color. I think I'm over pink. Let's go green. All right. So if we zoom in here, so this particular framework just makes it easier to overcome resistance when it pops up. As a leader and a manager, you need to be able to influence the way that people act. And this particular framework, oftentimes people will say, manage via systems. Well, what does that actually mean? How do you hold someone accountable? There's a couple of little pieces that need to happen. If someone doesn't do something, generally it's because of three reasons. They either didn't know why, or it wasn't important to them. They didn't know how, or they just didn't want to. They're the three reasons that people don't do stuff. So I don't know why. They might not even be aware that it's a thing. Perhaps you haven't communicated your expectations clearly. That's why the start of all systems, they start with why. Like you want to explain right up front the why this is important. I'll give you an example. I remember we recruited a sales assistant that came on board, but wasn't entering our data into our sales CRM. And then when I quizzed them about it, they said, oh, I didn't realize that that's what I was meant to do. No one had really told me. And I helped them to understand why that was important, because if you don't enter the sales data in, Sally can't run the report that she needs to run. And then we can't make decisions based on that report, because unless it's got the right data in there, those reports aren't going to be worth anything. And that team member just didn't know why it was important. So that's one of the first things you need to do. Make it clear why something is important and why we start systems with the why. And we outline those expectations. So that's the first reason someone doesn't do something. The second reason is that they don't know how. Oftentimes, someone can say, I just didn't know how to do the thing. No one showed me. I wasn't taught. And it's a really easy out for someone that I don't know how. If you assign a task to someone, even if you assign it in a project management and you're clear on, who is doing what by when, but if the how isn't there, you can't hold someone accountable to why didn't you do it this way if you didn't articulate what this way was. So that's, again, where the system comes into play, because the system will outline the importance and why, and they'll also give the detail on how it's done. And they'll also give the detail on how to report once it's done. So you want to overcome, I don't know how, we create systems, we train on them. And with both of these in place, we take away the reason someone can lean on why they didn't do something. And you'll see when this all comes together, once you understand the three pillars, the last one being the other thing, I don't want to. Some people might not have the motivation to do something. If they know the importance and they know how to do it, the only reason left why they haven't done it is because they didn't want to do it. They're clearly not motivated to do it. Now, there are a couple of ways you can address this. You can either incentivize the action that you want and make sure that there's a benefit for why they would want to, or depending on what the task is, some parts of their job just need to be done because that's part of their job. And if they don't want to do it, that's fine. They might not be a right fit for the company, but this particular role requires this particular type of thing being done. So how does that work in the real world when we're managing via systems? So if someone's not doing something, you go, hey, I noticed you've underperformed here. You're not doing the thing that you should be, and it's a little bit unlike you. And that wording, Simon's already got into the workbook for you, but that particular wording calls out the behavior, not the person. You're basically saying you're underperforming and it's not like you, which is basically saying you're normally performing, but this is not like you. What's going on? Look, I want to teach you this framework that can kind of help us get to the root cause of why you're not doing the thing. And then you can talk through the, I don't know why, I don't know how, and I don't want to. And you can say, you know, have I explained the importance to you? Like after you teach them the three, they might say, generally, if they're going to pick a reason they haven't done something, they're not going to say, I don't want to, especially if you're a manager or a boss. What they're going to say is, it's either I didn't know why it was important and I hadn't prioritized it, or I don't know how. So you first isolate and solve that issue. And what we're doing is we're setting up and taking away opportunities or options next time if the thing happens again. So if it repeats, you go, we talked about this last time. You know why this is important. You know how it's done. It's clearly articulated and you still haven't done it. So clearly, is it because you don't want to do it? And now you can have a much more real conversation. It's much easier at that point for your manager to lean on managing via systems and saying, well, this is the way that we do things here and these are outlined here. I don't care if you have the system opened or not, if you know how to do it correctly and you're executing it flawlessly. But until the point at which you can execute it flawlessly and unconsciously, you're going to have the system open. That's the way that we do things here. So you kind of, this framework is a really powerful way for your managers to hold your team accountable once you have clearly identified the why and the how, and then you're holding someone to that.